We're coming at you from the Billy C studio in Lake George in New York and from the LDL TV studio in South Florida. Glad you could join us. And speaking of joining us, my main man in crime. Yeah, well, he's just my main man in the heavyweight spotlight. Tony Triem joins us. What's up, brother?
How you doing, Bill?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. Let's not jinx it. We got a good connection here for a change, and I know you got some crazy weather. We got some crazy weather. But let's get this show on the road. We got another edition of the Heavyweight Spotlight, and today, rather than get wrapped up with a specific topic, I figured that we would do something similar to what we did last week. But this is kind of something that has been going on for a long time, and I actually wanted to get your thoughts on it. And I want to look at some of the older heavyweights that you and I love, and a lot of other old timers like, and I want to honestly get your thoughts on how they would have really fared, and how you could. I'm going to play devil's advocate here, Tony. I'm going to put the young fight fans hat on, and I'm going to try to do a case, even though I am going to agree with you. I'll tell you that right now. But I'm going to try to present a case to you, and I want you to try to explain to me. Like, for an example, Jack Dempsey. Jack Dempsey is a fighter that both you and I love, right? And we think he was a pretty crazy guy, pretty powerful guy. How would he have fared against a guy like Vladimir Klitschko?
Well, Dempsey, with his crouching style and the way he knew how to get inside, where the fighters today don't know how to get inside, would fare well. Because he would beat that body of Klitschko and he'd cut that tree down, and Dempsey was phenomenal, Bill, and you know that, and I know that, and he's probably one of my favorite of all fighters is Jack Dempsey. So, but his fighting style and his speed and his power, there wouldn't be a fighter today, and I know how the fight fans feel today. I understand what you're doing, but there's not a fighter today that would last 3 rounds with Jack Dempsey.
Listen, man, I agree with you, and I agree with your view on how to beat Vladimir Klitschko and get underneath that jab and work the body and use some power shots. And I agree with you. But
they say, Bill, that's all you got to do. And that's a hard thing to do. It talks cheap. It's easy to say it, but get in the ring and do it's another thing. That Jack Dempsey's a guy that could have done it. Well,
here's the thing. You look at the fighters of today, and as a matter of fact, we were just talking about this in the chat room for the Talking Boxing with Billy C show a little while ago, and somebody was saying, well, that's how you beat a Klitschko. You just get inside, and I had to say, well, it's easier said than done, just like you said. And it's not like Klitschko is avoiding a fighter that could do that. My question is do the fighters of today, have they lost the ability to get underneath the jab? I saw, I'm using Chris Arreola as an example. The guy has no answer for a jab. I mean, is it a lost art that fighters have lost the capability of getting underneath a jab and neutralizing a jab like Vladimir Klitschko's?
Well, I'm gonna answer that this way, and I hope it works. Today, the prize fighter does not know how to use head movement. They stand straight up, and they don't have the ring generalship that was taught back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, and 60s. And I think you have to agree with that. There is no fighter today that fights more than once a year, when back then they fought sometimes as much as once a week, and a lot of times once a month, and sometimes they fought 5, 6, and 7, 8, 9 times a year. You don't see that today. They don't have the experience that the older fighters had. They don't fight as often, and they don't have the skill set because There's no teacher out there today that can teach them those things. We don't have trainers today, Bill.
Well, they don't have. They have trainers, but they don't have teacher trainers. I agree with
teachers, that's what I mean.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. They have rah-rah men. They have guys that show them how to eat. They pat them on the back. They yell and scream. They slap them in the face, and they send them on out there. But let's look at some.
And I hate seeing these things because this today is the history of boxing. The young boxing fan today, when they get our age, these are the guys they're going to be talking about. Where our guys are going to be so far forgotten, it's not even going to be funny, and that's what bothers me.
Well, the thing is, I mean, the fight fans of today, they're proud of their fighters, just like every generation is. Yeah, exactly. So
and you got to respect that,
right? And I think athletic wise, they have the fighters today. I believe are more athletic than they were yesteryear. It's just a natural evolution because of the training techniques, the dieting techniques. We take better care of ourselves. Well, they do. I'm a fat bastard. But yeah. But let me look at this. Let me put it in perspective like this. Vladimir Klitschko, and we're talking about Jack Dempsey. Vladimir Klitschko is 6'6". He weighs about 240, 250 pounds, chiseled muscle. There's no question about that. He's not a fat guy. He's got an 81-inch arm reach, okay? And we know he's got some pop in his right hand. You look at Jack Dempsey. He was 6 foot tall. Some listings have him 6'1". He was between 6 foot and 6'1" inches tall. He never weighed more than 190 pounds in a fight. I believe most of his fights were around 180 to 185. He did have a reach that was, considering he was 6 foot tall, his reach kind of was long for that, but still 77 inches, was his reach, which really is only 4 inches less, but 4 inches is a lot. My question is how does a guy that's giving up 4 inches in reach and roughly 6 inches in height and roughly 50 pounds or more in weight, and by the way, he's not fighting a guy that is fat. He's fighting a guy that has a similar muscle tone as Jack Dempsey himself. That's when the argument comes into play. How does he get in there? If he could get underneath, does he hurt a guy like this? I mean, when do we say he just physically was too small to compete with a man like Klitschko? What's your thoughts?
Well, if you look at it like the fan today, yes, he's too small. If you have the mindset of the average boxing fan today, yes, Dempsey was too little, too small to get in the ring with any of the Klitschkos, either one of the Klitschkos, not just Vladimir. But Dempsey had that bull drive. I can't think of the word to use, Bill. To get inside, Dempsey was kind of like a Rocky Marciano. He wasn't afraid to get hit. I don't mean he had a style like Rocky Marciano. I don't mean it that way. But he had the mindset. If you hit him, that's cool. He didn't mind getting hit to get inside to do what he had to do, and for him, he would just rush in. His movement. He was so quick. Dempsey was. He had fast hands. He hit very hard with either hand, and he was not always a classy fighter or boxer. I mean, he would do what he had to do to win, and that's why he was so successful, and that's why he would, and I'm not answering it right, I can't think of the words. He would get in under that jab of Klitschko. He would beat Klitschko, and he would drop him. And Klitschko would not last 3 rounds with him. There's not a heavyweight today that would last 3 rounds with him. And I'm not putting the heavyweights of today down. You're talking about a prize fighter of yesteryear that was just so good. He was so fast. He hit so hard. And his crouching type style where he would crouch down and come up with his punches, and he would come up with his head and his torso to land punches. I think that would be his advantage if that answers it close to what you're trying to think of.
Well, I mean, I think that he his height, if he fought small,
That's what he does.
Right, and I think if he fought small against Klitschko, he would have an advantage. I think if he got into that crouch and was more than a 6-inch difference in height and made it very difficult for Klitschko to reach him. But consider this: his nemesis Gene Tunney was a boxer and was the same size basically as Jack. And he couldn't really find the way to beat him. I mean, we could all go to the long count and everything else, but for the most part, Gene Tunney outboxed him. He boxed the hell out of him. And with Klitschko's jab, I just wonder if he would have been able to get underneath that jab and if that arm reach.
Klitschko's not a boxer that Gene Tunney was.
No. I'm not suggesting that at all. But I'm using the jab. The jab is the big issue. The jab is a big issue, and I know it's easier said than done because I would say the same thing. If somebody asked me, well, how would Dempsey have beaten Klitschko? I would have answered the same exact way you would have. So let me ask you this: taking the same guy, we're going to focus on two big guys. One is of course Vladimir Klitschko, and quite honestly, Vitaly might have been an easier fight for Jack because Vitaly would have engaged a little more and opened himself up. But a guy like Jack Dempsey, who kind of winged his punches a little bit, might have been susceptible to a Vladimir Klitschko jab attack. But keeping that Jack Dempsey guy in mind, how would he have fared against Lennox Lewis, who was a similar in style with Vladimir, but I think that he had better boxing ability than Vladimir does. I think Vladimir, although I think he's athletic, he's got a great jab. I know he's got some power. I don't think he's got more power than Jack Dempsey did, but he's got some power. But I think Lennox Lewis had a similar jab. I think he had a little better footwork. I think he was a little more athletic. How does Dempsey fare against a Lennox Lewis?
I think Dempsey would have trouble with the Lennox Lewis, to be honest with you. I don't. Lennox Lewis is not one-dimensional where Klitschko is. Klitschko throws a jab, and that's basically so he throws and he waits. And of course the jab is the key to everything. That sets everything up in boxing. We all know that. But Lennox Lewis had ability. He threw combinations. He throws uppercuts. He cuts off the ring. He does things altogether different that Klitschko doesn't hit. The skills that Klitschko doesn't have. So I think that Dempsey would have a tougher time against a Lennox Lewis type fighter of a today modern era man. I think that's a good analogy, and I think that would be a good fight. It'd be a rough and tumble one. It'd be a much more exciting fight than a Klitschko-Dempsey fight, Bill.
Yeah. The thing
because
is...
of the skill... Then you have to admit... Well, you don't have to admit anything. But I think you agree that Lennox Lewis is a superior fighter over Wlad. In boxing skills.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. I mean, I'm not so sure. I think that Lennox had more of an arsenal. I think he displayed more, but I also think he seemed to be more susceptible.
He don't have the chin that Wlad has, I don't think.
Well, Vlad, that's the only thing. I mean, Vladimir hasn't been tested. We know the old Wlad, was stopped 3 times and, questioned his heart and his, failing on himself. And Lennox did those things too. So, I mean, mentally, I think Jack Dempsey is eons above both of the guys. But it's interesting that you feel that Lennox would have given Jack Dempsey a better fight than Wlad,
I think that Lennox Lewis, and this is just my opinion, But I think Lennox Lewis was a better champion and a better boxer than either one of the Klitschkos.
Is this Dax Khan? Am I speaking to Dax Khan here? I thought I was talking
You
to
want me to hang up on your ass?
I thought you were Tony Triem, but I don't know, man. I guess I'm one of the only. Listen, I give Lennox Lewis a lot of credit for staying away and everything else, but while he was active, I guess
Lewis had better opposition, Bill.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can make a good point.
Look at the last 15 years. Okay, when Lennox Lewis was champion, a lot of those guys are gone now, and the Klitschkos never even saw him. Lennox Lewis had a much better fight record than the Klitschkos do, and it's not the Klitschkos' fault, and I'm not putting the Klitschkos down. They're fighting who's out there today, and that's all. They don't have any choice. That's all they've got. The heavyweight division today is terrible. The heavyweight division was bad in Lewis's day, but not as bad as it is today. So when and that's why I'm saying Lewis is the better of the two fighters. Is looking at the opposition, looking at who fought who and when they fought, and looking who Klitschko fights and when they fought them. And there's no comparison. There's no heavyweights today. It's not Klitschko's fault. It's not fair to put the Klitschkos down and to criticize them because they can only fight who's available. And so I that's my main reason for my putting Lennox Lewis above a Klitschko. It's not that he's so much of a better fighter, although he does have better ring skills, and I think we both agree to that. He possessed much better ring skills than either one of the Klitschkos do, but he had a better reign than the Klitschkos have, as far as our position goes.
Well, first of all, when you look at the Klitschkos, they fought everybody that's available.
That's right, and that's all they can do.
Right. I mean, nobody can really criticize them for fighting weak opposition. But consider this: Lennox Lewis, roughly, in the latter part of his career, when he retired as champion, when he had the belt for all those years. I mean, Andrew Golota, Shannon Briggs, Evander Holyfield is a great fighter that he fought a couple of times. Michael Grant, who just
Andrew Golota would beat any fighter today, Bill. And I hate Andrew Golota. He was the dirtiest heavyweight out there. He was fun to watch, but he'd beat anybody out there. Then he was not a great fighter.
No, he wasn't a great fider, but he had some mental. Michael Grant, Francois Bartha, who's still fighting. Michael Grant's still fighting. David Tua was a very good fighter in that era. Hasim Rahman a couple of times. I mean, so I think my biggest knock on Lennox Lewis was that he did fight a lot of fighters that weren't that good. The difference is he fought them when they were young. Klitschko seems to be fighting the same names, Hasim Rahman, and I don't think he fought Michael Grant, but same kinds of names, but they're already 100 years old. But
right. And again, to defend the Klitschkos, it's not their fault. That's what's out there. They either fight those guys, or they fight David A, or they fight Andy Ruiz, or however you say his name, Ruiz Jr. That's all that's out there, Bill.
Yeah, but Andy Ruiz, heavyweight, that's building up his record right now. I mean,
he reminds me of Eric Esch. Remember Butterbean?
Yeah.
That's who he reminds me of.
Really?
Yeah.
No, that's not a good. When you're being connected. When you're being compared to Butterbean, I mean that's not. Let's talk about Joe Louis, man.
Joe Louis, the way he reminds me of.
Joe Louis, one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. He weighed under 200 pounds in his prime for most of his fights. His reach was 76 inches. Again, that's less than Jack Dempsey's, and he was 6'1.5". How does a guy like Joe Louis, who, we did a segment on him one time when he was being criticized in his era that he was fighting a bum in a month, and you and I dissected the so-called bums of the month, and they were better than most champions of today. How does Joe Louis fare against Vladimir Klitschko should these two have fought? I mean, what do you think in that one?
Joe Louis was probably one of the prettiest heavyweights in the world to watch in the ring. He had a beautiful jab, he had pretty footwork, and he threw a dynamite right. And Joe Louis, without any doubt, would stop a Klitschko easy.
You don't think the size would have been an issue for him?
No, not with Joe Louis. The size would have been an issue with Dempsey, but with his crouching style and stuff that I was talking about, that would have been to his advantage. Joe Louis would have walked in and taken care of business. Joe Louis would throw the brown bomber, as they called him, would throw that bomb, and he would drop him.
But Joe
Louis would beat either Klitschko easily.
But Joe Louis
or Lennox Lewis.
But Joe Louis was only 1 inch taller than Jack Dempsey, and Joe Louis had a tendency to stand straight when he fought.
But he boxed. That like they're going to try, like the Klitschko's try to do. He boxed. He had head movement. The Klitschko's don't have. Louis could cut the ring off. He had ring generalship. He knew how to get his men in trouble quick. The Klitschko stands up straight, throws a jab, and throws a right. Throws a jab, and throws a right. You can't tell me, with the experience that Joe Louis had and the ring knowledge that Joe Louis had, that he couldn't get around a jab and a right cross. And that's all they throw. Louis threw everything. He threw uppercuts. He threw crosses. He threw rights. He threw combinations. He'd throw a hook off of a jab. Nobody sees that today, and Klitschko wouldn't know what to do. Wouldn't know what hit him.
And Lennox Lewis, what do you think?
He'd beat Lennox Lewis just as easy.
Joe Louis, obviously one of the greatest heavyweights of all time.
Held the title longer than anybody.
And I mean the bottom line is that he he threw multiple punch combinations too, and he didn't he looked for openings, and he was aggressive. When he found that opening, he went after his prey. It seems that Lennox Lewis and Vladimir Klitschko both similarly. They put their opponents to sleep with the jab, and they're content with winning a fight like that, and the inability of their opponents to get under that jab basically causes the loss. So I agree with you with Joe Louis, and don't get me wrong, all these names that I'm throwing at you are like my all-time favorite fighters. So I'm not suggesting they wouldn't have beaten. I just I'm throwing at the question and the old saying, a good big man will beat a good small man, and that's what we're basically dealing with here.
And that analogy is probably true in a lot, but there's also always an exception to the rule, and the two men that you brought up are just exceptions to that rule, and they were great in their time. They are remembered to be great men, and I don't care what boxing man you talk to that goes back like we do. Those two names stick way out, Bill. I mean, they're high on everybody's list. When you talk about great champions and top teners, both of those guys are high on top 10 list, most of them.
Now, what about my man Rocky Marciano? Shorter than both of these guys. He was listed as 5'10". Who knows if that was correct? His weight around the same weight as these two guys that I'm talking about, 184, 188 pounds. His reach was substantially shorter than both Joe Louis and Jack Dempsey at 68 inches. I mean, I have longer arm reach than Rocky Marciano. But nobody could match Rocky Marciano's power and his will and heart to win. Does he stand a chance with first Vladimir Klitschko?
Well, that's a good question. That's a good analogy, Bill. Rocky had no boxing ability at all, none. Only thing he knew to do is to duck and walk straight in and throw punches. He had no skill whatsoever. He had no footwork. No, he could not be knocked out. No, I don't think he was ever dropped, was he? In the ring?
Yeah, Jersey Joe dropped him.
I mean, yes, Jersey Joe did. That's right. He. You're right. I forgot about that. I don't think he would fare as well as a Dempsey or a Lewis. I don't think that a Klitschko would knock him out. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But I don't think that he could beat a Klitschko because of their height and their powerful jabs and their hard rights. I think they'd wear him out. You know, they would, because he had no skill as far as a boxer. He just put his chin down and weighed in, throwing haymakers and throwing them from every direction and every angle. You know, and I think Klitschko could probably eventually, weighed that off because they didn't punch himself out. Is what I guess is what I'm trying to say.
You see now,
it tire him out.
You see now, I look at Rocky Marciano, and I say to myself, this guy would have went into a Klitschko or a Lennox Lewis and would have been doing like what you and I talk about. You would have been throwing punches, landed them on the arms, landed them on their thighs, for God's sakes,
Yes.
In their chest, and occasionally hitting them in the chin. And I think that nonstop, slow beatdown, a methodical beatdown, as long as he didn't get caught with something that put him to sleep, I think that if he were able to get a guy like Klitschko or Lennox Lewis into the deep waters, into those later rounds, I think he puts him to sleep. I think he's got more of a chance because of his heart and of course his conditioning. I mean, nobody was better conditioned than Rocky Marciano. I agree with you that technically, by the book, he did everything wrong. He did everything wrong. He didn't deliver his punches right. He didn't do anything that they laughed at him when he first went into the ring. But you know what? He must have been doing something right. He never lost, and he put most of his opponents to sleep. And
Bill, you bring up a good point, and you got to respect that view that you just gave. It's a great analogy, and I respect that. But him being so little, and like you said, beating the arms and beating the body, and once in a while getting lucky enough to hit him in the head if he could, when he come up from the floor and threw a haymaker up that in that direction. Maybe he could hit him in the chin. I don't know, because he was such a short man for a heavyweight. But you make a good point, and I don't think anybody can argue that point you just made.
Yeah,
I think you got to respect that.
Well, I mean, I just think that the way he broke, the old saying, chop down the tree,
Yes, and then go to the tree will fall.
Right,
and the trunk and the tree will fall.
And
Absolutely.
I think that he is a perfect example of that. And with Rocky Marciano fighting a Lennox Lewis or a Vladimir Klitschko, I think that's exactly what you would have. You'd have a guy working on a tree, and I just think I would be shocked that if a guy like Lennox Lewis or Vladimir Klitschko could outlast Rocky Marciano. I couldn't see it happening. I just couldn't see it. Now another issue that we got to keep in consideration is that the in the eras that these guys are fighting, Jack Dempsey, Rocky Marciano, Joe Louis, that we've talked about so far, referees would allow fights to continue. Last week we talked about Rocky Marciano fighting Ezra Charles and his nose flip-flopping on its face. They would have stopped fights like that. It would be interesting to see if Klitschko's jab or Lennox Lewis's jab would have cut a guy like Rocky up and slice him to ribbons and have the fight stop on cuts. I mean, I think I could see that happening before them stopping The Rock.
Well, and Rocky went 15 rounds.
Right.
For a championship fight, not 12. And I think they should go back to 15 rounds for a championship fight. You know, they talk about the championship rounds. After the 10th round, you got the 11th and 12th, and it's over. Well, the championship rounds are the 12th through the 15th, in my view. And that's the way it should be. But I think there should be 8 weight classes and 8 champions, too. So I don't think we want to go there. That's not what we're here to talk about.
And I think the world should not have hunger in it. I think that we should stop that lunatic over in Korea.
And we should have 40 wives.
Well, you better be quiet. You probably got one lurking around the corner there with a club. But let me throw this one at you. We mentioned some other names. How about a Jersey Joe Walcott? Jersey Joe fought Rocky Marciano. He was already, a guy that had been around a while, and a lot of people forget that in that fight, the fight in which Rocky won the world title. Jersey Joe was winning that fight. There was no question that he was winning that fight. Rocky Marciano looked ordinary at best until that famous knockout punch. I mean, Jersey Joe Walcott at his best, in his prime. How does he fare? Considering he was similar in size, he was a little heavier. He weighed about 195 to 200 pounds, but he was only 6 foot tall. He had a 74-inch reach. I mean, that's pretty damn close to a Lennox Lewis. I'm sorry, he's not close to either one of those guys. I was thinking of Jack Dempsey, who had a 77. But how does Jersey Joe Walcott fare against a guy with an 81-inch reach in Wlad and an 84-inch reach in Lennox Lewis?
Well, Jersey Joe, and back in that day, nobody had the reach or the height that they have now, other than Jess Willard, and that's who Jack Dempsey fought for the heavyweight championship. So, not a lot of people had the ring experience with a man of that big, the big giants like we have today, and very few in the yesteryear in the sport of boxing. We didn't have the big giants. Jersey Joe was one of the great good heavyweight. He was a better light heavyweight. I think he'd have been a better light heavyweight than he ever would have been a heavyweight than he was as a heavyweight. He was a little man. He possessed good ring skills. He had power. He was a great boxer. But to put him up against Klitschko, and I don't think that Jersey Joe would have fared well in that type of a fight, Bill.
How about Smoking Joe Frazier? 5'11" and a half, 205
Joe Frazier,
pounds.
I think, would have been a good opponent for him. His bobbing and weaving and ducking and that crouch of his, I think he'd do well against a Klitschko. And you're not talking that far back here. Now you're only talking 20 years. I mean, yeah, I think Smoking Joe done real well.
You're talking about
he hit hard. There was no stop to him.
You're talking 40 years.
No quit.
You're talking 40 years. Time flies.
Okay.
But
time flies, baby.
Yeah, 205 pounds, 5'11", a guy that predominantly had one punch that was so successful. Interesting to see. I agree with you. I think he would have gotten in there, but I actually think Lewis, Marciano, and Dempsey all would have given Wlad and Lennox more trouble than Frazier. No disrespect to Smoking Joe. I love Smoking Joe, but let me ask you this. How about Larry Holmes? Larry Holmes was 6'3" and a half. He weighed 210, 215 pounds. He had an 80-inch reach. You're getting a little bigger now. How does Larry Holmes fare against a 6'6" guy in Vladimir Klitschko, or a 6'5" in Lennox Lewis with the arm reach advantages that both of those guys would have had?
I like Larry Holmes. I think that he's a lot better than people give him credit for. You and I discussed this before. I think Holmes was a good champion. I don't think that he would fare well. I think either Klitschko would beat Larry Holmes in their prime.
Either Klitschko wouldn't or would?
Would.
So both Klitschkos could beat Larry?
Yep.
Yeah, I thought, listen, I'm just coming around with Larry Holmes. I thought he was, if it wasn't for my buddy Ernie Shavers telling me, looking me right in the eye in a car, we were driving back from an airport, and he says, Larry Holmes was a great fighter. I asked him, was he a great fighter? I mean, what do you think? And he said, yeah. And, I started softening up to him since then. But up until then, and that was just... We
don't like Larry Holmes because of his cocky attitude and and his bragging. The people got tired of that. And people quit watching him and quit giving and paying attention to him because of his bragging mouth, But Ali was a braggart. Nobody got tired of Ali, and I'm not putting Ali down. But nobody got tired of Ali. Ali, all he did all through his career is run his mouth. Another man that Larry Holmes runs his mouth the same way, only a little bit more brash than Ali was. And he's criticized. Lennox Lewis was a good prize fighter, and he hit hard, and he did well. But he could not have beat Klitschko.
Well, one of the things about Lennox Lewis and Larry Holmes that I find very similar is that they both were always asking for recognition. I don't get the credit I deserve. I need respect. I need this. I need that. And that weighed on me. It's interesting.
And a lot of people.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that he wouldn't have beat either one of those guys. I don't know. I don't have an opinion on Holmes because the jury's still out on him. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm still, and I mean that. I know people are going, "What are you talking about?" I mean, as far as my own opinion of him, I'm starting to give him more and more credit now as I look back. How about Big George?
Well, let me say this about Holmes, and we'll move on. I was with him here a month or so back. He was here in town, and I was with him. And I was talking to him about different champions, and I was talking to him about his era. And I thought he made a really interesting comment, and I kind of respect it, Bill. And maybe the listeners will like what he had. I was asking him about different champions in his era, and Ali, and Spinks, and all of them. And he goes, Tony, he goes, I was the heavyweight champion of the world. I was the best there were in my time. He goes, all these other men that you talk about, and you go all the way back, he said, to John F. Sullivan, all the way up to the Klitschko. He says, they're the best of their time. He says, can't we all get credit for what we were in our reign as champion? And I thought that was a good answer.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, and that's basically what we're trying to do. What we're doing here is just dream matchups. And, how about you look at the two Wlad Klitschko and Lennox Lewis against George Foreman, either George Foreman. Now, consider that the George Foreman number one, in his prime, the one that destroyed Frazier, the one that got knocked out by Ali, weighed 220 pounds versus the second generation of George Foreman, which weighed 250 pounds. Which George Foreman, if any, do you feel could have beaten Vladimir Klitschko or Lennox Lewis, or both?
The young George Foreman. The older George Foreman wouldn't have stood a chance. The younger George Foreman would have had a better chance at beating him. I enjoyed watching Foreman fight. He didn't have a lot of footwork or skill. He was kind of a come straight at you type of a fighter, throwing the jab and throwing that powerful right at his. And I think that his strength, and taking nothing away from Klitschko's strength, but I think his strength, and he's a little bit better of a boxer. I think that he would have done well against Klitschko.
How about Evander Holyfield? What do you think about him?
Holyfield was too little and didn't. No, I don't think Holyfield would have done well at all.
Well, it's funny. Too little. He weighed 215 pounds, 6'2", 215 when he was fighting at heavyweight. The very first, when George Foreman was wreaking havoc on the heavyweight division, he was an inch taller, 6'3", and weighed 218 pounds, 3 pounds heavier. When you look at it like that, when you look at it from statistics, from
on paper, he looks better.
Right.
In the ring, he wouldn't do as well.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the thing I always, and I was never a big I was never a big fan of Evander Holyfield, and
I'm not either. But I'm not using that as the criteria for him getting beat by Klitschko. That has nothing to do with it whatsoever, and I want that understood. I'm trying to be. You're asking me these questions. I'm trying to look at them honestly and fair, and skill against skill. And I don't think that Lennox Evander Holyfield would fare well at all against either one of the Klitschkos, Lennox Lewis, or any of the heavyweights we've talked about so far. He would not.
Well, here's my thought. I agree with the size factor, but and I agree with you. I was never a big fan of Holyfield's, never was. But here's the one thing I've always said about Evander Holyfield, and you have to give him credit. I have never seen a fighter, Tony, in all the years I've been following the sport, I have never seen a fighter with the recuperative powers of Evander Holyfield. I have never seen a fighter that, for all intent purposes, and all you got to do is look at the George Foreman fight, and George Foreman nailed him with a shot in that fight that sent him clear across the ring. And if there wasn't ropes there, first of all, that should have been ruled a knockdown because the ropes clearly kept him up, but sent him straight across from one set of ring ropes to the opposite side. And and he was out against those ropes with his head down, totally out, leaning up on his feet. And George Foreman plodded over to him. And the 2 seconds, 1 second, however long it took for George to plod over to him and try and unleash one more punch to knock him out, Evander Holyfield got a little twitch of life left and was able to hold on and come back and end that round, getting the better end of George Foreman. I mean, I have never witnessed recovery powers like that in a prize fight. What's your thoughts?
He was on steroids.
That's what you can say about Juan Manuel Marquez, right? But that's another division.
He had plaster of Paris in his gloves.
They said that about Dempsey too, right?
Yeah, horseshoes. Bill, I guess, to be honest, I never noticed that with Evander of his recouping power that you're speaking of. So I can't answer that question because I wasn't a fan. I didn't watch him that closely. I watched these fights, but I never watched him that closely. So I'm gonna leave that one alone.
Well, let's look a little closer in time, even though it seems like yesterday. It was at least 15 years ago. Riddick Bowe. Now Riddick Bowe was 6'5". He weighed 230 pounds at his peak. He had a similar reach, 81, same as Klitschko. Riddick Bowe had hand speed. Riddick Bowe, I think was one of the biggest wastes of talent because he wasn't dedicated enough. Could that guy have beaten both Lennox Lewis and Vladimir Klitschko? As a matter of fact, before you answer, a lot of people believe that Riddick Bowe against Lennox Lewis was one of the greatest fights that never took place.
And I've heard that before, and they probably got a good point there. Riddick Bowe only lost one fight in his entire career, and that was against Holyfield, I think. And I think that was questionable. I think that was a controversial decision, if I remember right. Am I right?
Well, wasn't that the fan fight? Or is that a Lennox Lewis fight? No, that might have been Lewis and Holyfield, the fan man. But it was controversy. Riddick Bowe, Big Daddy. I mean,
if he was in shape, and took it serious, I think Bo could have been a lot better fighter than he was. He didn't take it serious. He didn't train. He just went on brute strength, because he was so strong. But because of his not being serious about the sport and not training the way he should, no, I don't think that he would beat a Klitschko for that reason. If he was serious and really trained, it would be an interesting fight. But I don't think that he ever really got serious about any fight.
Well, the best fights, that fan man was Holyfield and Bo was the second one.
That was his hooray of his whole career.
Well, what about the Andrew Golota fights? The Andrew Golota fight with Bo was a classic. The Madison Square Garden bench clearing brawl when you saw Rock Newman whipping out his cell phone that was the size of a lunchbox in those days, and he's beating somebody on the head with it. They carried Lou Duva out on the stretcher. Out. Talk about mayhem. They think it's bad now, but I got one more fighter to throw at you, and of course one of my all-time favorites. Actually, I'm going to throw two. I'm going to give you your all-time favorite too, but my all-time favorite, Mike Tyson. Well, I'm not going to say Sonny Liston because we talked a lot about him last week. I think Sonny Liston actually would have beaten both of them anyway because of his arm reach and his jabbing ability. He would have out-jabbed the jabber. But Mike Tyson in his prime, before jail, Mike Tyson against Lennox Lewis. I know they fought already, but that wasn't the same Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson in his prime against Lennox Lewis, or Mike Tyson in his prime against Vladimir Klitschko. How do you see it coming out?
You're talking about the 19-year-old heavyweight champ of the world.
I'm talking about prior to
that era of his career.
Right. I'm talking about the Mike Tyson that was a world champion prior to going to jail, prior to the Buster Douglas fight. That Mike Tyson.
Everybody was taller than Mike Tyson. Everybody he fought. Mike Tyson was his bobbing and weaving and head movement was phenomenal. Mike Tyson was a headhunter. Mike Tyson went in there with one intention, that was to knock you out. That was his intention. He threw every punch with bad intentions. He not only intended it to land, he intended for it to do damage when he landed it. And that's the difference with Mike Tyson than a lot of these other guys that we talked about. He went in there to hurt you. And he would, and did, and he would beat the Klitschkos. The young Mike Tyson we're talking about, the young kid that was, that set this world on fire. Everybody just loved Mike Tyson at that time. Yes, he would beat Klitschko.
Yeah, I think so. I think he would have beaten, and I really think he would have beaten Lennox Lewis too. But obviously Lennox has the win over him, so we can't really say that. But but
you're talking about the old Mike Tyson, not the young Mike Tyson.
Right. I mean, we're all
that's a whole different fighter.
Right. I want the Mike Tyson that was with Rooney. I want the Mike Tyson that was dedicated to his craft, the Mike Tyson that was virtually unbeatable. But one last guy I want to ask you about, Jeffries. James Jeffries. Now, obviously, it was an earlier era, but James Jeffries was a big dude, 6'2.5". He weighed 210 pounds. He had for the time a pretty big reach at 76.5 inches. His style was a rough and tumble style, but he would destroy people. He virtually had no one to fight when he retired before the Jack Johnson fight. How would Jim Jeffries have fared against Vladimir Klitschko and or Lennox Lewis?
You're not being fair with that question, Bill.
Well, I know you love James Jeffries.
You're not being fair with that question.
I know you love James Jeffries, but now you got
You're trying to get everybody on my ass. I can see that coming. Jim Jeffries is one of my most all-time favorites. He was the Boilermaker, as they called him, because he was so big and strong and powerful. And he was undefeated until this fight that he had with Jack Johnson when the America called him back to beat when America called him back to beat Jack Johnson, because everybody was so upset over him becoming the heavyweight champion of the world. We're not going to talk about Jack Johnson. I understand that. But Jeffries was unbeaten in his career, and he retired, like you said. He was strong. He was tough. He could take a punch. A mule could kick him in the jaw, and I don't think it would drop him. I don't think that Klitschko of any era could stand a chance against James J. Jeffries, one of the greatest heavyweights of all time.
You know, it's funny. You look at you look at the techniques that they use today to train, the diets, the scientific muscle.
But I don't think that's better, Bill. I know you're saying it is, and I've heard you say it many times. I don't agree with that analogy.
Well, wait a minute. You're not letting me finish.
Brute strength, work, physical. I mean, Jeffries wasn't a muscle man, muscle on top of muscle. He was strong, tough, and you can't beat that.
No, he was called what I call farm tough. But let me finish. Today they use all this scientific stuff and everything else. What I wasn't gonna give an argument of why I feel that the Klitschko's or Lennox Lewis would have beaten him. My point was simply this: of how much the technique has changed. James Jeffries, for being a guy that was as strong, and I call farm strength, and I know you agree with me, as strong as he was, his techniques would have killed someone today. He used to limit himself to 1 quart of water a day during. I mean, I don't know how he didn't die of dehydration. And his idea of strenuous activity would be that he would go for a boxing camp. When he would prepare for his fights, he would go in the woods for a month and hunt mountain lions and bear and deer and go fishing and climb up mountains, and that's how he got his body in shape. And that's why, and this was what I was trying to get to, that's why his body was toned the way it was. It was strength. The guy that can lift up that boulder and toss it around like it's a pebble can't lift the weights, you know what I mean? But the guy who can lift the weights can't move the sack of grain, you know? So, I mean, it's a different type of muscle tone, and Jim Jeffries was way ahead of the pack during his era.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, muscle, you know, I've heard so many people, I've never heard you say it, but I'm sure you're going to understand what I'm saying. A lot of people will look at a wrestler as he steps into the ring, and they say, look at the muscles on him, look at the body on him. And now look at James Jeffries. He broad-shouldered, big arms. He had a big torso. Wasn't fat. It was hard as a rock, but a big torso. No muscle structure at all that you saw. You don't see a Vander Holyfield standing there, you know, body-wise. Muscle does not make you hit any harder.
Well, I remember
those pretty muscles don't make you hit harder.
I remember
those that make your skill any better. And a lot of people think, but you know, God, I'd hate to be in the ring with him. Look at the arms on him, or look at the muscles on him. That muscle don't mean a thing in the ring. It's more damage than good. You get those muscles cramping up or tightening up on you, you're not going to do anything. You want to be the type of a prize fighter like James J. Jeffries, the way he trained, the muscle tone he had. You don't get tired. You don't wear out, and you just keep plodding. If he could go 75 rounds, James Jeffries would be in there with you.
Well, I know this. It depends how you get those muscles. If you do it push-ups and stuff like Ron Lyle. I'll never forget watching Ron Lyle walk into the ring for the first time. I was like, oh, my God. Look at the muscles on that guy. He looked like well, even Frank Bruno. Frank Bruno had a beautiful muscle tone, but he had no no legs, But Mike Tyson too. Mike Tyson had decent muscle tone. So
but look at the legs on Mike Tyson.
That you
also,
see, well, that's the key. That's
they don't run like they did back then. They sit in the gym on a stationary bicycle, or they don't run. They don't do the same technique today that they did back in the day when prize fighting was great. Not that boxing is bad today, but when it was great, they don't train the same, Bill. The training back then was brutal, and it made a man out of you. These training today, the new techniques today, I don't agree with at all. I know you talk about how it's better and this and that, and I don't agree.
Wait a minute, you never heard
I take that older training anytime.
I didn't say that it was better for boxing. I said that the techniques today scientifically are focusing on specific muscle groups, toning the body. The diet it's all. I mean, we know that only drinking 1 quart of water for a full day is no good for you. We know that not eating vegetables and stuff like that is no good for you. We know that stuff today. We didn't know it then. Back in 1900, hey, that was himself toughening himself up. Who was it? Jack Dempsey. Didn't he put brine on his face to toughen his skin? So I mean,
to toughen it up, yes.
Yeah,
so that he wouldn't get leather burn and stuff. Yes,
right. So I mean,
yes, absolutely.
So things like that. We've come a little way. But anyway, interesting segment today, my man. I enjoyed it. I refrained from throwing Sonny Liston into the mix and my man Jack Johnson.
And I wish you would have, because he was a great guy. I love Sonny.
Well, Sonny's one of my favorite fighters. I think he would have beaten. I think he's one of the most underrated heavyweights of all time to this day. I think so. I also think Jack Johnson. I think Sonny Liston would have beaten both Klitschko and Lennox Lewis, to be honest with you. And I also
Sonny
think
Liston would have beat Jack Johnson too.
Well, Jack Johnson, I think would have. I wish that he would have come along in a different era.
He
because
was way before his time.
Yeah. His style was, considered boring because he was so good. And somebody compared him to a modern day Floyd Mayweather. But
he played with these fighters.
Yeah, he toyed with them.
Johnson played with the fighter. His opponents. He made a joke of them. He toyed with them. He was before his time. He really was. He was a good fighter, but his antics and stuff, that's what hurt him more than anything. If he wouldn't done the nonsense that he was pulling with the white women and stuff, which was against the law back then, and taking women across state lines, and he is fetish for prostitution and stuff. That's what killed his reputation as a boxer. If you leave all that garbage out and just look at him as a boxer, he was a pretty good man in the ring. He's pretty tough.
He was my kind of guy. I would have liked to have hanging out with him, bringing the women across the state lines for immoral purposes, hanging out at the bars, smoking cigars, dressing in
driving fast cars, paying the ticket twice.
That's right.
Once at a time, and once because he's coming back. Just left the money in advance.
That's right. And
I mean, he was a crazy dude. I mean,
smoking.
You have to love him.
Smoking them big cigars. I would love to hang out with Jack Johnson. That's for sure.
Drinking the finest scotch that there was.
There you go. That's me. I'm with my man Jack, but I like hanging out with my man Tony Triem too. So we have a good time. Tony, great segment. It's time flies when you're having fun, and it's about that time for us to wrap it up. And we'll be back next week, and we'll probably pick a specific topic that we'll talk about, but a specific fighter, I should say. But I certainly like bouncing around like we did today and last week, and we'll have to wait and see what comes our way next week, my man.
Bill, let's do this a little more often. This battering back and forth, I think, is fun. I think it brings out some interesting points. You bring out some excellent points that I always learn something when I'm talking to you, and I always enjoyed that part of it. You're never too old to learn about this sport that we love, and we ought to do this once in a while instead of just talking about one guy for an hour. We need to do this, kind of interweave this kind of a segment in. I think it'd be fun.
Well, the next stage is we'll have some interaction. I know we're going to get John from LDL TV involved from the studio. He was chiming in here in the chat room about Lennox Lewis, and I know that if he had the opportunity to be yelling at us right now, all three of us would be yelling at each other, and pretty much you and I would be ganging up on him because he thinks Lennox Lewis would have beat all of our heroes. But that's a whole nother story. Maybe a future show.
Well, he must be married to Dax Khan.
Yeah. I think they went to different schools together. but anyway, Tony,
Lord,
great job.
Lennox Lewis was not a great champion. He was a good fighter, but he was not a great champion, and he would not fare well with the great champions of the past.
Well, I'm with you there, my man. Listen, Tony, great segment, and we'll be back next week, same time, same channel, right?
That's right, my man.
All right, Tony, take care.
Ciao, baby.
And we'll be back next week right here on LDL TV. See you then. Ciao, baby.